And we are live. Welcome, everybody, to Lubbock Compact Live for Wednesday, November 17th. And we are going to be talking some redistricting today, among some other things. I am your host, Adam Hernandez, and here with my co host, Dr. Nick Bergfeld. And so we've got some updates on the Dupre Elementary situation that we'll go ahead and kick off with. And we have some other updates from around the city before we get into the redistricting. So, Nick, you want to start us off with where the Dupre situation is?
Yeah, so after the vote of the school board on this and just sort of the challenges that have started to I think some of the questions around it, the difficulty that parents had in getting feedback from the school board, I think to me, the thing I'm really focusing on is just how energized the neighborhood has been since.
Yeah.
And wanting to get organized and wanting to get involved, wanting to engage and believing that this is a conversation that is not over.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I want to start with, is that people right now are saying that, yes, the vote happened, but this is not a conversation that's over.
Yeah. And this is actually something that we spoke about even before the vote was taken, because we know how a lot of times these things play out. And so we knew that it was a possibility that they could still vote to close the school. And so pretty much everybody I spoke to about that prior to this vote was completely down to continue this struggle, because I have not found one person yet, regardless of where they sit on the political spectrum, that is okay with the situation as it is right now. I mean, closing 10 schools in the last 10 years, I don't even remember how many is it just in the past few years. It's been what, 6 maybe?
Yeah.
Five or six?
Three just last year.
Right. 3 just last year. And so it's a very dire situation. I mean, it doesn't really take much explanation from us for people to understand that if this continues, our city will die. And you'll just have a whole bunch of land out here where the city used to be, that's just going to be dilapidated, run down. And then you're going to have what some folks refer to as Lubbock 2 as the only Lubbock that we'll have.
Right. And it feeds into a conversation we're going to have about redistricting, and why that conversation has been so hard as well is because of the changing shifts of the city of Lubbock's population. How not only has the African-American population in the city of Lubbock, not only has it not grown, it's declined. Not only have some of these neighborhoods stagnated, but they've also lost families and people in the community. And that is what's making so many of the conversations right now challenging around, is this right? Is this fair? These types of choices that when you take away one of the most important amenities in a neighborhood, what is the expectation when it comes to families and their willingness to want to be a part of that community?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as we've stated over and over, one of the first things folks look for in a neighborhood is a school. That's the first thing they look at. And so it starts with, what are those schools rated at? And the same thing happens as if you didn't have a school. If you have a low rated school in a certain area, or several low rated schools in a certain area, and then in other areas, the schools are all rated higher. I mean, most folks are not going to say, yes, let me willingly send my kids to a lower rated school. And so that starts the process. And then it only gets worse when you close the schools. And as far as the academic performance of the schools, that's a leadership issue.
Right. And not only that, but when you close an elementary school and you're sending kids to schools that are academically performing worse than that school, it's hard to justify this from a quality of education standpoint as to why this makes sense. And it's a consistent history. When some of the East Lubbock schools were being closed, there were individuals within the communities who were saying, this seems like a very cynical way for LISD to try to mask failing performance. And if we just shuffle around the kids, if we close a academically well-performing elementary school and we close a bad one and we mix those kids together, LISD on the whole will look better from a performance standpoint. And this has been something that folks in the neighborhoods have been critiquing for years and saying, this seems like a numbers game. When you make arguments that this is about quality of education, why is it that every time when these schools are closed and the kids move to another school, it doesn't seem like the test scores are improving?
No.
you know?
Yeah, they're not. And when you look at just a little over 3 years ago, there were two schools in LISD performing at what's called an unacceptable level. There's a certain threshold in the grading of schools that if they fall below that is considered operating at an unacceptable level. There was two of those just a little over 3 years ago, and currently there are at least 10 operating at an unacceptable level. So the plan that has been being carried out is not working in any regard.
And you think about, how do you get communities back in schools? We all agree, whether it be Dr. Rollo, the superintendent, the board of trustees, everyone agrees that community needs to be in schools. Everyone laments that PTAs in Lubbock oftentimes don't have a lot of parents in them, that they're not active, that they're not participating. But when you force a family to send their kid to a school that's 3 miles away, that's out of their neighborhood, what are your expectations on the amount of time that these individuals who are typically, working class, lower socioeconomic status, working multiple jobs, oftentimes with no benefits, what is your expectation of their ability to be able to get to a school, to participate in a PTA when it's out of reach? That sort of goes all the way down to the students themselves. What happens when a kid in the Dupre area, what happens when a kid in the heart of Lubbock neighborhood misses the bus to Harmona, right, in the morning? How is that kid going to get there? Are they going to call an Uber, right? Like a Lyft, or, they can't, they're going to cross multiple streets of traffic. If say they're going to try to walk the 3 miles, right? They're crossing Marcia Sharp, they're crossing 19th Street. Industrial areas, right? To get to a school that was built in a cotton field.
Right.
You just think about the practical realities that people are living day to day, and how close to the edge they are, how much their lives have to be structured just right to be able to make sure that their kid is able to get to school on time, that they're able to get to work on time, that there's daycare services available, because they're not going to clock out from their shift until 6 o'clock, right? Or maybe they'll clock out at 5 and they'll have to make it back for dinner service, right? When you live that type of life, it's incredibly hard whenever just one additional barrier, one additional challenge to that can disrupt the entire fabric of the way that you've had to structure your life just to get by. And so when we don't think about how is it when you remove a school from a community, how that impacts the whole of the family, how that it impacts their ability to participate in the school itself. When you don't think about those things, that's when you lose sight of why, when communities are in schools, that's when communities thrive, that's when schools thrive.
Yeah, and so this will be a continuing story. As Nick stated, the community is becoming very active.
That's what's exciting to me.
Yeah, and we are in the process of doing some planning meetings. Our first one is tonight, matter of fact, after the show. And this will be an ongoing campaign. And so it's going to be very important for folks to get engaged in this next election cycle.
Yes.
I know that oftentimes with especially school board elections, the turnout is very low. But we've got to change that this time. And every time going forward, we have to stop this process of closing schools. And what it looks like, again, I have nothing personal against anybody on the school board. There's 2 of them that I have worked alongside many times that I know, from other things. The rest of them, I don't know at all. I've just only barely met them. So I don't have anything against any school board member or LISD itself. Our goal is to get this situation under control for the future of our city and for the future of our kids, because just besides the closing school thing, I mean, the performance of these schools, that is absolutely a leadership issue. And so whatever is going on with the current leadership, they don't seem willing to move from the idea of closing schools. And this is why we say the only recourse we have is to vote them out, unfortunately.
And to me, I do think of one trustee Trustee Curry, who made some statements during the commentary period after parents spoke that were harmful or hurtful to those who were some of the people that were in the audience, about some comments around the school district pouring money into failing schools, and to say that we shouldn't have a conversation about race when it comes to LISD. And I just love to sit down with them and have that conversation. I'd love to drive past the elementary schools that have closed and have conversations with people who still live in those neighborhoods, and have Trustee Curry just sit down and talk with how damaging this has been. And we can have an understanding of, why does community matter, right? Many of the trustees talk about how, well, there's no PTAs, there's no engagement in the PTAs anymore. And so parents don't care, they're not engaged in these conversations. And so why is it that, they're not plugged in, they're not tuned in, and it's their fault then? It's the parents' fault because of that fact. And I just wish we could have a better dialogue around why are there challenges in keeping these schools open? And let's hear about the difficulties of working multiple part-time jobs, and how beneficial it is to have daycare services in an elementary school in that neighborhood. Let's talk to the people that have had these problems in the past, that have seen their schools be closed in the past. Let's drive the neighborhoods and have that conversation, even if it's a difficult one, because I don't want him to think that money that is going into these schools is pouring dollars into schools that don't deserve it. I don't want somebody who's on the school board to be thinking about that way. Let's put human faces to these numbers. Let's put stories to the data, and realize that there's a much bigger picture here about what happens when you take out what oftentimes is the beating heart of the neighborhood. And to me, when it comes to Heart of Lubbock, please, history shows that when an elementary school closes, that community engagement decreases, that voter turnout decreases, because people despair that there's nothing that can happen after that point, that the story is over. And for the Heart of Lubbock neighborhood, it's not over. This conversation is not over. You have the ability to change this destiny, but it involves not falling into despair, but recognizing that what's needed now more than ever is engagement, and being visible, and making sure that your story is being heard, and continuing on with this all the way until the May elections.
Yeah, and the other big issue, Leah pointed this out in the comments, another big issue. So first of all, I've also heard from a couple of different trustees about this so-called low engagement in the PTAs. Right. But I have, in my possession a document that LISD gives to the Board of Trustees that says what their goals are. And the most recent one they've given them was to raise PTA engagement across the district from 85%, where it already is, which is really high. That's not low engagement. Yeah. So 85% to I think it's 95% by 2026. So it's already at 85%. That's not low engagement. And as Leah points out, the other part of this is the parents who are showing up, and even staff, are kept in the dark about what's really going on. They're not given the information at all. For instance, we spoke last time about this meeting where the superintendent came to the over a Zoom meeting to some of the parents and some of the staff just last year at Dupre, and told them that they were going to be in a program that was going to give them 4 years to improve the scores of the school, right, and that they were going to have a year of planning and then 3 years after that to actually carry out the plan. This was just last school year. They were supposed to have, I think, another 4 other meetings, but after that, they never got contacted for the other 4 meetings. They never heard anything about it. The only thing they heard next was, oh, by the way, we're closing the school. And so this is another issue which absolutely falls on the leadership. And this is the last thing I'll say before we move on. The big red flag that we should all be seeing here is anybody in a leadership position, especially somebody who's an elected official. It's bad for any leader or anybody in a leadership position, but especially people in an elected position should never be trying to pass the buck off onto the constituents. Never, ever. Because not only is that not accurate, that just shows that you're not even up to the task of being a leader. Because again, we all have our own kind of ways of thinking, but when it comes to leadership, in my mind, in all the leadership roles I've been in, I don't ever think that way. It's always on me. If it goes good, it's on me. Great. If it goes bad, it's also on me. And so when you're passing the buck, that's just not acceptable for any leaders. And when it comes to something that's so important as the education of our kids and the well-being of our kids, that makes it even more important to get those kind of folks out of there and get folks in there. It's really a low bar. Just care, actually engage with the community, and work together. I mean, it's really not hard. And LISD has plenty of resources to provide any sort of backup help to principals or teachers or whatever. There's plenty of funds available, especially since they've got the American Rescue Plan Act dollars at $75 million for that specific purpose. So there's really just no excuse. And so it's just a failure of leadership. And again, I don't know those people personally, but I call it how I see it, regardless of who you are. And that's just what it is at this point. And so it's very important that we stay engaged on this and that we continue to organize. You will be hearing not only from us, but from a lot of folks across the city about this, because again, we are going to be meeting and getting our plans together and actually executing those, because this absolutely has to stop, or our city is going to die. It's really that drastic. That's not an overstatement. It's not hyperbole. That's what it is. Our city will actually die if we let this practice continue. And it makes even less sense when you have every single ISD that surrounds LISD not only flourishing, but growing rapidly for the same 10 years that LISD was closing schools. All of those surrounding LISDs were growing and are now raising bonds to build more schools, while LISD seems content to die, and we just cannot let that happen. And so that is the Dupre update. We will, of course, keep you all updated on that situation as we move along. And so I was able to attend the LEDA meeting. LEDA is the Lubbock Economic Development Alliance, and this is a joint meeting that they have every month with Market Lubbock, which is also, they kind of are in cahoots together, if you will, to basically try to get more visitors to Lubbock, try to get more businesses to Lubbock, or any other kind of things like that Lubbock may need. And so really interesting stuff. I got a lot of good updates here. So the city apparently got their latest budget numbers in. And so the sales tax collected has been 82.3 million. The budget is 74.8 million. So that's really good. We're not in bad shape there. And they said that there has been 7 consecutive months of double-digit increases year over year.
Right,
So.
and this is really impressive, y'all, because one of the challenges for a city like Lubbock during COVID time is that a lot of our taxes that we generate, and that becomes the revenue for the city of Lubbock and for financing, is in sales tax. And for cities that require, for us, it's about around 45% oftentimes is where sales tax, what that represents for our total revenues as a city. And when we looked at the journey that we went through during COVID time, it was predicted that cities that had substantial amounts of their revenue coming from sales tax were going to experience the hardest economic hits as a result of the COVID crisis. And so, like many communities, we saw that dip. It was significant during sort of the darker periods before we started to get our vaccination rates up, and before essentially a significant amount of our population has now had COVID. And so there is some amount of latent immunity there as well. And what we're seeing now is a very robust recovery for an economy that very much so is dependent upon transactions, sales transactions in both services. So that's retail, that's people going to department stores, purchases there, and food service. And so for us, there were big concerns, both in terms of how would Texas Tech students, because they're a massive driver of our sales tax revenue, how exactly would COVID, how would we respond to that? What would be the impacts of this? And so as we're kind of coming out of the period of COVID time in the city, we're seeing a very, very robust recovery when it comes to the city's finances and the revenues that are generated. So when it comes to the city's finances, not for the citizens, many people in the city of Lubbock are struggling. The eviction restrictions have ended. You know, there's a lot of challenges that are happening in the community right now. But when it comes to the city's ability to balance its budget and to provide the services that it needs to, it's in a really good position still.
Yeah, and then so they also had a workforce update that they do, and so currently the city is at 4% unemployment, which is around normal, I think. And then so we're back to above where we were a year ago as far as jobs created. And so they looked at September of last year to September of this year, which was definitely during the pandemic, and 5,000 jobs were created in that time. And so again, that's back to above where we were a year ago. And then so one of the things that stuck out to me that John Osborne said was something that I've been saying, and I caught ridicule for it in the early days, but I believed it then, and it's just only been proven now. The paid to stay at home thing is not happening here in Lubbock. It was never happening here in Lubbock with the unemployment, how people were saying, oh, well, these people are getting paid to stay at home and yada, yada, yada. That is not happening here.
Right. You know, the unemployment additional top up, the fact that that expired early in the state of Texas, that only impacted, you know, people essentially that were in desperate need, who were struggling or who were challenged to begin with. It was not able-bodied individuals that were essentially skipping out on being part of the workforce because they were getting such generous unemployment benefits. You know, and that's just not the culture here in Lubbock. Where this is not a community that focuses on that type of sort of. You know, we're very proud people. You know, I think if anything, we're very reluctant to ask for anything. We'd much rather just try to get along as far as we can until essentially the wheels fall off. And that's sort of when, in that sort of moment in desperation, we end up reaching out to folks. And I think sometimes that pride actually gets in the way of folks who actually are deserving and require or would benefit from being able to access services and don't do it. I think more so than you know, people being able to live off of unemployment benefits for an extended period in time. And we see that, you know, Lubbock, you know, from a purely national standpoint, anything below 5% unemployment, that is considered the natural rate of unemployment in the United States. Anything below that means that you're at a level of what's considered to be full employment. And so in Lubbock, we see that the workforce that we have is back, it's active. I mean, you can see this in so many sort of different numbers. I was looking at the data for the basketball attendance. And Texas Tech basketball games, so we've only had a couple so far, but Texas Tech basketball attendance is actually ranked, I believe, number 2 or 3 in the nation in terms of overall attendance for those basketball games, in terms of sheer number of turnout. And that's sort of a good indication of our sort of ebb and flow economy. Whenever we're starting to see that kind of attendance, that kind of traffic to the city of Lubbock, that's a lot of people coming in from the Metroplex to participate in those games, to watch those games. And so we're seeing some of the stimulus effects of our sporting events coming back in a pretty robust way. So.
Yeah. And so something that I'm very interested in, the marketing update. You know, these organizations, part of what they do is marketing Lubbock, because marketing is everything, whether you're an organization or a business or whatever the case, or a city. Marketing is everything. And so the year in review with much more detail than we're going into here is available on the LEDA website, which is LubbockEDA.org. And it has a button right there that will take you straight to the year in review. And you can see a lot of interesting data and stuff about what our city has been going through. And so one of the things that they said, which is something that we are very much focused on at Lubbock Compact. So it's good to see LEDA looking into this. But one of the things that we've been saying, and many people have been saying, is the fact that Lubbock has a hard time keeping people here,
Yeah.
especially when they graduate from tech or whatever the case may
Massive
be.
brain drain.
Right. Yeah. So we don't end up keeping a lot of our best folks or bringing many people here for a long list of reasons. But the good news is that they are now starting. They haven't put this out yet, but they're developing a messaging campaign that's going to focus more on the quality of life here in Lubbock and the work-life balance that a lot of folks enjoy out here, versus just saying we have jobs available. Right. So they're going to do some stories. They have several stories they're going to do where they're going to talk. Well, they already have talked to them and they're going to be putting these out, but they've talked to several folks. One of them had lived here for a very long time, moved away, went to Austin, started a business, didn't like it, ended up coming back to Lubbock, bringing the business to Lubbock, and is doing very well. They've talked to some folks who, never lived here, who moved here and decided to stay here. They talked to somebody who was born, raised here, stayed here the whole time, and still decided to stay here. So those things I think are really good. And they're also going to be promoting Lubbock as a veteran-friendly city.
Oh,
because I was not aware of this fact. The military memorial that's out on 82nd Street in almost Quaker. I bought my brother a brick on this memorial when they were building it. He was in the Marines, and I didn't know that it is actually the only second to the World War II memorial in Washington, D.C. It's the largest and second largest in the country.
Wow. And that's exciting to me. I think on both of those, with veterans, one of the things that I think has made this region strong is the fact that we have contributed a very, very large number of individuals to the war efforts historically across the United States. And you can directly link the growth of the city of Lubbock, our sort of massive expansion, to the return post-World War II of veterans and the fact that they had the GI Bill. And it wasn't that the GI Bill just simply paid for them to go to university. It was also that the GI Bill actually provided low interest rate loans to buy houses. And so when you see a lot of the housing stock in the city of Lubbock, and there's this sort of big expansion in the 50s and 60s here, that's actually from that. And that's really the moment where Lubbock sort of turned into what it is today, was because of this sort of large infusion of federal dollars coming in to support those who had been part of the war effort. And there is unfortunately one tragic part of that history, which is that at the time the GI Bill did not have those types of programming, or were very restricted for African Americans. And so here in Lubbock, there's actually a very large African American veteran population as well, who served and did their time, were just as honorable as the Caucasians that were here, but actually never benefited from those programs in the same way. And so I do think it's something to be mindful of that disparity of people who are coming back to East Lubbock after the war effort, and not having access to those benefits in the same ways that a lot of the other parts of the city did. And that was one of the reasons why Lubbock expanded to the south so rapidly during that period in time, was this infusion of federal dollars that came there. I think the other one, just to mention that, this is the millennial challenge, right? Mm-hmm. And Lubbock, for the longest time, we could not crack the code on how do we attract millennials to the city of Lubbock? How do we attract these individuals that are mobile, that are working in the knowledge economy? What is the selling point that we can have for them? And for the longest time, the feedback has always been, well, the nightlife in Lubbock is not good. There's not enough entertainment. There's not enough cultural events, cultural activities. And so we're just not really finding this place appealing. Well, part of what has actually happened is that the millennials grew up. And so for a lot of them now, they're looking not necessarily for awesome, amazing, active nightclubs, but they're looking for a place with a backyard so that they can have a pet. They're looking for a two-bedroom, 3-bedroom house because they want to have a family. And so I think one of the things that we're benefiting from Lubbock is the fact that we really always have hung our hat as being a family-friendly community. And the millennial generation is finally kind of coming into their own. They delayed having children much longer than the baby boomer generation did. And so now they're finally starting to think about those types of priorities. And Lubbock as a whole is actually benefiting from that. because of that fact. And so, it's not necessarily that we really crack the code to how do we engage millennials, so much so is that the value propositions of what Lubbock are have become more appealing to them as they've gotten older. And so I'm excited about that because I think it does bode well for the city's future when it comes to being able to attract families to the city of Lubbock. And so I think it's very appropriate to think about that kind of engagement and how can we bring those folks back.
Yeah, and they're also going to be promoting Lubbock as a continue. They already do this, but promoting it as a sports destination, which I have a little bit more on here in a second. And also a lot of our museums. Another thing I found out that was interesting, the Vietnam War Museum that we have, which I didn't even know we had, but we have a Vietnam War a lot of stuff from the Vietnam War, and that's actually the largest one in the world.
Yeah, so this is a collection that is curated by Texas Tech, and it is actually world renowned. For somebody that is working in or creating any type of research around Vietnam, the archives that are maintained here are absolutely phenomenal in terms of the documentation, both when it comes to government records, but also from personal accounts of those experiences. And so there's been a lot of work that has come out of there. As a result, they've even sponsored documentaries looking at people who had experienced the tragedies in Cambodia around genocide and things like that. That sort of was a domino effect of the Vietnam War. So it's an amazing facility and one that I don't think gets a lot of attention.
Yeah, I knew nothing about it. And so the other thing that has been going on at LEDA, again, I didn't know about this. That's why it's good to go to these meetings. But they did not apparently have a dedicated sports salesperson.
Yeah.
So they have one now, and they have really been getting after it from what was expressed in this meeting. And so some things to look out for coming up. There will be a large archery competition that will be coming to Lubbock, and that's a 3-year commitment. So that will bring, each time it'll bring about 2,500 to 3,000 visitors to Lubbock. There's also going to be, and that is also a feeder into Olympic archery. And then there's a couple of other events that also feed into the Olympics, which would be USA Boxing and USA Judo that will also be coming. So.
Yeah, that's amazing to me, really. And I don't think enough people know that we have Olympic qualifying events hosted here in Lubbock. We have Paralympic qualifying events hosted here in Lubbock as well. And part of that reason is because we have a lot of open space, good facilities, and a low cost for hotels. And so if you're an athlete, oftentimes you're working on your own dime. You might have a sponsorship, but for things like, say, boxing or for judo, as an example, we had an Olympic qualifying judo competition here. For those individuals, this is in the United States, other countries sponsor their Olympic athletes, things like that. In the United States, it's all heart and passion. And so, when it comes to these types of qualifying events, they're looking for places where there's a good cost benefit when it comes to sort of the overall cost for the athletes themselves, the quality of the facilities, how easy it is to get around. And Lubbock, actually, we really do shine when it comes to those types of events. The Burl Hoffman Soccer Complex is excellent. We have tons of baseball fields. Our tennis center needs a bit more improvement. I think there was actually some interest around some renovations there, but we have great sporting facilities. And it's just honestly something that when you think about our region, every time that Lubbock sponsors one of these types of events, it means that a kid from Shallowater, a kid from Tahoka, a kid from Sudan, a kid from Anton, it means that they have opportunities to be able to participate in these things as well. And so by Lubbock being this regional hub for being able to attract these highly competitive events, it gives our kids and our youth and the folks out here exposure to high quality competition that's so necessary for them if they plan on pursuing those types of activities themselves. So it's really just great. I would actually love to keep seeing this. I'd love to see esports. I'd love to see us embrace esports. I'd love to see us with drone racing, which is becoming pretty popular. We could easily have just an incredible, we have so much land, could easily have a phenomenal drone racing.
An outdoor one.
Right, exactly, right? Like facility here. So I think it's just something that we really should hang our hat on and keep promoting. So it's awesome.
Yeah. And then just one last thing, and I forgot to put it on my notes here, but just one last thing in the kind of economic city level sector, not so much economic, but the infrastructure bill was signed into law by by the president. And so Texas, we found out, is getting 35 billion of those dollars. And so we this is for infrastructure, roads, and things of that nature. We will be, of course, following this very closely. I'm going to, as soon as I can, dig into the documentation to see what we can get and what we can kind of pull for, because this again is another reason why it's important for us to stay engaged, because we need to have input on these things.
Right. And this is, and we have to be visible about these things, because coming back to this idea of pride, historically as a community, we leave money on the table. When it comes to grants programs, when it comes to federal dollars, federal financing for opportunities, we leave a lot of that money on the table. And I understand that we're coming from the perspective of, we want to be independent, we want to do things in our own way, everything like that. But at the same time, if we're not using these dollars, someone else is, and they came from our income taxes, they came from our taxes in general. And so we're not doing ourselves any favors by making this a purity test when it comes to whether or not we'll accept federal dollars and things like that. So we absolutely do need to continue to advocate for those things, and to make sure that we have a seat at the table when it comes to the financing, because a lot of these things ultimately end up being a ton of inside baseball in Austin. And so we need good visibility and strong representation, because otherwise we always get kicked out.
Yeah. And so moving on to some neat news from Lubbock, before we get into the redistricting stuff. So Texas Tech meat judging team. I don't know if you all knew out there that Texas Tech has a meat judging team. They have captured their third straight national championship in a row. And this is actually a very big deal. So I'll just kind of read it off. The team from the Department of Animal and Food Sciences in the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources captures its third straight national championship at the 2021 American Meat Science Association International Meat Judging Contest. That's a lot. In Dakota City, Nebraska. And so from what I understand, they get up super early in the morning to do this. This is a very involved process, and takes a lot of hours, a lot of expertise, and they literally sit in a freezer and watch meat.
Yeah, and this is so just a huge shout out to this. If you're not familiar with Texas Tech meat judging, it is an absolute dynasty. They multiple times have been back to back champions in meat judging. The CASNR, so that's the College of Agricultural Science and Natural Resources. CASNR is what we call it. That program, the kids that come out of there, just so excellent and just so humble in how they approach this and just how they have absolute dominance. If you want to be supportive of them, if you've never heard of this, there is a facility on Texas Tech campus called Red Raider Meats. You can buy meat from there. And so this is meats that they potentially have used as part of their practice and sort of things like that. It's part of their educational programming, is the butchering of these meats and things like that. If you go and you buy Red Raider meats, and they're very, very high quality meats, if you buy them from there, that proceeds go to scholarships for the students in these programs. So if you think this is really cool, shout out to them, just absolute champions. This is something like the 16th time that they've won the national championship. Just incredible dynasty. And if you want to support those kids, please shop at Red Raider Meats to get your next meats for your cookout, or on the grill, or on your stove. So yeah, just a great little story, and something I don't think a whole lot of people know about, but they're just incredible.
Yeah, very, very amazing stuff. And so now I guess we'll go ahead and move on to redistricting. So I'll let you kick us off on this one.
So redistricting, so we just briefly mentioned this at the beginning of the program, where one of the biggest challenges and why the redistricting conversation in Lubbock is so hard is because over the past 10 years, while yes, the city overall grew over 10%, how it grew was incredibly unbalanced. And it wasn't just that some areas grew a little bit and other areas grew a lot. It was that some areas actually lost people, collapsed in population, while other parts of our city grew. And on top of that, the other challenge becomes that there are federal mandates to try to maintain districts where our racially minoritized populations have a voice in voting. And so traditionally that's been keeping District 2 in the eastern portions of the city, so that our African-American and traditionally Black neighborhoods are able to elect somebody who has their interests in mind and is going to advocate for them. And similarly with District 1, that traditionally has been in the northern parts of the city, representing the historic Hispanic neighborhoods of Guadalupe, Arnett Benson, and Jackson Mahon. Now, because of the way that the city grew, and because those areas of town actually lost population, it is forcing them to have to grow outside of those traditional areas. And so while a couple of the districts in the southern border of our city, so those are districts 4 and 5, those districts actually grew so much that they need to get smaller in size. And then people living in District 6, that area grew at just about the right amount population-wise to sort of maintain its same orientation. Now, the real challenge behind all of this is, what does this mean for the individuals who traditionally have been represented by Districts 1 and Districts 2? District 1 historically has always been about advocating for the northern areas of our city, because their needs are very much the same. The needs of Guadalupe, Arnett, and Jackson Mahon have been very similar. The dirt streets, needing road repair, needing infrastructure investments on major streets like North University and the loop over there and Clovis Highway. They've always had similar interests when it comes to infrastructure investments. And so that's why having a council person who is looking out for those interests has always been very, very important. Now, what is happening in the proposals around redistricting, it's effectively going to pull Districts 1 and Districts 2 away from the traditional areas that they have advocated for. And so not only does this mean that it'll be a council person that is having to advocate for much larger areas, but also the original neighborhoods that those areas were designed to represent, that their voice when it comes to city policy is also going to be lost in this kind of mess of how these new districts are looking. And so the city council had their first opportunity to look at redistricting and the proposed map at their work session, this early work session at 9 a.m. on Tuesday. And Adam, you were able to attend that. And what was that meeting like?
Well, it was similar, very similar to the first time the consultant came to talk about this. It was really just kind of running down some demographic data. Only this time he actually did show the map that they came up with, which is causing us a little bit of trouble, right?
Yeah, so there are some difficulties here. And specifically, the question becomes how to preserve some of the racial characteristics of Districts 1 and 2. And so Councilman Chavez for District 1 and Councilwoman Patterson Harris for District 2, District 2 and Councilman Patterson Harris, really she's in the biggest bind. And that's because when you look at where population declines have occurred, it's predominantly in her area. Not only that, but her district, the mandate for it is to try to preserve as much of the African-American vote as it possibly can. The difficulty there is that the African-American population of the city of Lubbock has moved around a lot. And so no matter how you cut it, it's impossible to get the representation in District 2 above, say, about 22, 23% African-American. And that's partly because African-Americans in our community are very dispersed now. They're living essentially in other communities, whether it be predominantly white neighborhoods or predominantly Hispanic neighborhoods. They're effectively small populations throughout the rest of the city. And so what that's causing District 2 to have to do is to really, really distort itself, where it traditionally has been mostly the eastern portion of the city to the east of I-27 with a couple parts that go into central Lubbock. It's now being forced to have to eat components of even District 4, which is the southern part of the city. So it's now going, some of the proposals are now having it go as far down as 98th Street, and I believe, I want to say University or Indiana even. And it's forcing District 4 to look funky. But a lot of these challenges are actually coming from the fact that the council member representing District 1, Councilman Chavez, has been really sort of focused on trying to get more of the Hispanic vote out of central Lubbock. what that's doing for Councilwoman Patterson Harris, who's being pushed essentially into a corner, is it's making her district look like this kind of weird boot, L-shaped kind of boot, where she's having to jut out pretty far to the south and west and away from central Lubbock, because that's where she borders Councilman Chavez's district. And he has not been willing to work with her when it comes to thinking about how those boundaries are going to work. And so as a result of that, the East Lubbock, the traditionally East Lubbock district, is now the person who's going to represent that district is now going to have to advocate not just for East Lubbock, but for southern portions of the city as well. And at the same time, District 1, where Councilman Chavez is representing, the future representatives of that district will have to be advocating for not just North Lubbock, but central components of the city as well. And so the challenge has become, what parts of these cities are people going to be advocating for? Because we know that there's a strong advocate for the western portion of the city, that's District 6. We know that there's strong advocates for the southern part of the city, that's District 5 and 4 to some extent.
Mhm.
We know that there's a very strong advocate for the central portion of the city, that's District 3. And so the question then becomes, who's going to advocate for the East? Who is going to advocate for the North? Those are the areas of the city. When you follow city government, oftentimes when we're thinking about, say, where road dollars are going to go for, or paving dollars are going to go for dirt streets, we think about them in terms of sections of the city: north, south, east, west, central. And so if you're not having good representation who's fighting for those areas, the question becomes, how are they going to get lost in this dialogue when you have council people who are going to be representing the northern portion of the city, but are going to be coming from central Lubbock? Similarly, with District 2, what's going to happen when individuals who are representing essentially all of the eastern portion of the city, but they're actually living and representing parts of our population that are, say, at University and 82nd Street, or even farther, 98th Street. And so that's where it becomes a challenge. How do we make sure that we have strong representation for areas of the city of Lubbock that have shared needs and shared interests? And so I hope that as this conversation continues to develop, that District 1 and Councilman Chavez sees the value in working with Councilwoman Patterson Harris in District 2 to figure out a way where both of them can be happy, where East Lubbock and District 2, where it's not forced to jut out so far into the central portions in this kind of weird bulge to the south central portions of the city, where it gets more consolidated. And similarly, where District 1 stays mostly northern, and that it doesn't have to expand or take territory from the central portion of the city, because that just simply muddies the waters about what it potentially is going to represent in the future.
Yeah, so this, of course, I know that it's a little complicated for some folks out there, but this is very important stuff. And the reason why it's so important and why we focus so much on North and East is because as it stands right now, it is hard for us to get anything in these two areas. I mean, anything. And that's hard for folks to understand who may be in District 4 or 5 or 6. These are experiences that, especially if you've lived in those areas your entire life, you've probably never experienced. And if you're living in Lubbock and you live in those areas, you've never experienced that. And so in these older areas of town, it's not only frustrating, this is very critical to our experiences in those areas of town and for the future of those areas of town, which is, the schools is a part of this, but also the districting is part of it. Representation is a part of it. And as I said, it's hard enough as it is. So if they change these districts in a way to where, in essence, folks who have the interest of certain groups in Lubbock can't get elected, then that's a problem. And you're going to end up kind of, maybe not as bad, but almost in a situation like it was when we had at-large council positions.
Right. And you have to ask the question, is it any surprise that the area of town that lost the greatest number of elementary schools has now lost the greatest amount of its population and is now losing its representation and voice in city government. Right? All of these things are interrelated. They're connected to each other because when you have healthy, thriving communities, people want to be there. They want to see their families grow there, and that next generation want to stay there. I think one of the most touching moments for me when it came to the Dupre conversations was when a 92-year-old alumni spoke about what Dupre meant for his family, his children and his grandchildren, and the history that represents. Because that's what schools end up being. They end up being the anchor. They end up being the carriers of history, of culture. And when those disappear, is it any surprise that people ultimately leave? And that when they leave, those areas, their voice and their ability to fight and to advocate for themselves becomes weaker. And over time, you see that gets trapped in a downward spiral. And I don't see, it's so difficult to have these types of conversations when in the numbers and when you drive the neighborhoods and when you see the impact of these things, it's just so clear how these things become a one-way road and the direction that these things are trending, unless we change and do something differently, unless we recognize that we have to be able to find ways to be different, to advocate in a different way, to think about our communities in a different way, to think about the value of schools in our communities in a different way.
Yeah. And so I guess we'll leave off on the note, in the spirit of what Nick just said. The way that we're going to have to start to deal with this is that you need a city council and a LISD school board who, first of all, make a resolution that says we cannot close any more schools. We have to figure this out. And then when you make that realization and you make that statement, then all that's really left to do is the work. Right. And so if the folks in those places right now are unwilling to change the way that they're going about things or to even try to think about them a different way, then again, it all goes back to us to be engaged in these elections and make sure that we are not only voting for folks who can kind of get with the program, if you will, but also we need folks to run for these positions. And so, again, as I have many times, I encourage folks to, if you or you may know somebody who you think would be great in one of these positions, a lot of times those folks, take it from me, are not going to necessarily be thinking about running for anything. So if you see it in them, you think, you know what, such and such would be so great in that position, approach them, ask them, and start now, because it may take them months to decide. Again, take it from me. It may take them a long time to decide. It is a very big decision for somebody to make to run for an office. I don't care what it is. And so start to have those conversations, or if that's you, if you feel like, you know what, I could do it, I have the heart to do it, then go for it. I know I've got a lot of questions about qualifications for these seats. And there are very specific board positions in the city where they will let it be known up front, you'll need some sort of qualifications. The majority of them are not like that, including the city council and the school board. There are no qualifications. So,
and for me, I want to end with just saying that your vote matters. There are 2 city council people right now that got into their positions by less than 5 votes. And it's similarly, if we go back in the history of the school board, your vote matters here. It has an impact on the outcome of these elections. And part of that reason is because of the apathy that most people in the city of Lubbock are just tuned out, uninterested, and can't be bothered to vote because they essentially think nothing will ever change and that their vote isn't going to matter. But it matters here. It matters so much. A single neighborhood, like say the heart of Lubbock, if that neighborhood turned out and voted for the at-large school board position, they would win that election just simply from that neighborhood alone. That is how close these numbers are. That is how tight these races are. Part of that is because voter turnout in these elections is usually less than 10%. That's unfortunate. That's an indication that our democracy is suffering here. But what it also means is that if you can find the time to vote early, if you can find the time to register even one person to vote, become a registrar, find one person to register to vote, if you can find the time to drive somebody to a supermarket so that they can vote in early voting, or drive them on election day, it matters. It matters a lot. And you have the ability to influence the outcomes of these elections with your voice, with your vote, with your community. And so stay engaged, recognize that these are winnable fights that you can be involved in.
Yeah, and I think that is a great note to end on. And so we, of course, will keep everybody updated on all these things as they're unfolding. The next redistricting meeting is happening on, can I remember?
30th?
The 30th, yes, that is correct. So the next redistricting meeting is going to be happening on the 30th. And so we will, of course, again, keep you all updated. We are continuing to work with folks to try to figure out kind of what would be, I guess, the best way to try to redistrict these
It's just gonna
districts.
be tough.
It's going to be really tough.
There's no good answer because of what's happened to our city. And we're seeing this now in the reflection of, and it's just going to be tough conversations and challenges. And I think my biggest concern is that I don't know if we'll see another individual who came from an East Lubbock neighborhood representing that district without a fiercely contested election, just simply because of the decisions that have been made over time that have encouraged people to move away from those areas, that have encouraged families to not live within that area. And as a result of that, we are seeing those effects now. And it just simply, it continues to spiral. And so we have to advocate in the ways that we can, be optimistic and supportive of Councilwoman Patterson Harris as she tries to make the best of a terrible situation, in the hopes that this can be salvaged in some way.
Yeah, and with that, we'll sign off. And before we do, I will give you our weekly reminder to join your neighborhood association. And speaking of neighborhood associations, the North Lubbock Neighborhood Association's meeting is tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. at the Maggie Trejo Super Center. I encourage anybody. You don't have to be from the neighborhood, but definitely if you're from the neighborhood. But it's good to get to these things. You get to meet people from different areas of town. You also get to pick up on different things because, excuse me, at each neighborhood association meeting, there's different speakers. And so you may catch one or two speakers at one and then catch a whole different one or two at a different one. And so these are great sources of information, which is why we always tell you to join your neighborhood associations. And so we will sign off with that. And if you can, make it out there, 5:30 p.m., Maggie Trejo Super Center tomorrow for the North Lubbock Neighborhood Association. And we will see you right back here next